Dr. Carr squinted his multiple eyes, blinking in disbelief as he stared at the human patient on the examination table. The sterile, pristine white of the Galrin medical facility gleamed around him, casting a cold glow that only served to heighten the strange scene unfolding. The room was crowded with alien doctors of all species, each silently observing the human with expressions that ranged from morbid curiosity to pure astonishment. Among the galactic species humans, the so-called Deathworlders had become infamous for surviving what would easily kill most others. Yet, even with all the stories that circulated, nothing had prepared the medical staff for the sight they were witnessing. Marshall, the broad-shouldered human soldier on the table, gave a casual glance down at his exposed leg. A jagged shard of bone jutted out from a tear in his skin, surrounded by deep bruising that hinted at the force of whatever impact he had sustained. There was some blood, of course, though not nearly as much as the doctors might have expected. With a shrug, he tilted his head, as if he were merely observing a minor inconvenience. "Yeah, it's sticking out a bit," he muttered, almost with a nonchalant amusement. "Hurts like hell, but I'll be all right." Dr. Karks's primary mandibles clicked together nervously, a reflexive gesture that betrayed his unease. In all his years of medical expertise, never had he encountered a patient so dismissive of a clearly critical injury. Among his own people, the Valik, a fracture of this magnitude would have meant weeks of recovery, constant bed rest, and elaborate treatments. Yet here stood this human, calmly discussing his grotesquely broken leg as if it were a mere inconvenience. "How did this happen?" one of the other doctors asked, a Vitron with 4 tentacles for arms that stretched out as he leaned closer to examine the injury. Marshall scratched his chin thoughtfully, maintaining an air of calm that only served to unnerve the gathering crowd of alien medics. "Oh, just a training exercise. I took a fall from a cliff after some equipment malfunction. Landed wrong," he explained, gesturing lazily to his leg. "You know the rest." "A fall from a cliff," one of the assistants gasped, his eyes wide with horror. "You should be in shock. Your vitals should be failing." Marshall let out a hearty laugh, the sound ringing loudly in the quiet, sterile room. "Yeah, I probably should be," he said with a chuckle. "But hey, things happen. No use crying over broken bones." Leaning back on the table, he stretched his arms over his head, looking more like he was preparing for a nap than dealing with a severe injury. Dr. Karks exchanged glances with his colleagues, each of them registering their mutual astonishment. This was beyond anything they had been taught in medical school. The physiology of these Deathworlders was strange enough, but their mentality, the sheer audacity of accepting severe injury with such casual acceptance, was something entirely foreign. Most species would have been heavily sedated by now, their systems flooded with emergency medications. Yet, here was a human acting as though he'd merely sprained an ankle. "We must address this injury immediately," Dr. Karks stated, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. His usual methods of treating fractures felt almost primitive in comparison to the task at hand. After all, an open fracture was life-threatening by most standards. But the human only raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering across his face. "Life-threatening," he echoed, almost tasting the words as if they were foreign to him. "I mean, maybe if it gets infected, or if I start bleeding out, but you're overreacting a bit." Waving a dismissive hand, he added, "Just pop it back in, patch me up, and I'll be good to go." The medical staff stared at him, frozen in stunned silence. Pop it back in? Did he really just suggest they simply push the bone back into his body as if it were a dislocated joint? For most species, this type of injury would require complex surgery, extensive therapy, and weeks of recovery. Yet here was a human soldier, treating it like a bothersome splinter. "Your pain tolerance is astounding," Dr. Karks managed to say, his gaze flitting between the gory wound and the human's calm, even slightly amused expression. "We have strong sedatives we could administer before we proceed," he offered, his voice uncertain but laced with professional courtesy. Marshall adjusted himself on the table, peering down at his leg with a shrug. "Nah, no need," he replied nonchalantly. "It's not the first time I've broken something. You just get used to it, you know." He winced slightly as he shifted, his face betraying the slightest flicker of pain, but he quickly suppressed it, glancing up at the aliens gathered around him. "Go ahead, do what you need to do, Doctor." Karks hesitated, his usual confidence shaken. He held the medical instruments in his claws, trembling slightly. This was completely outside his realm of experience. Yet somehow, the human's calm demeanor offered a strange sort of assurance. Humans were known for their resilience, and here was a living example teaching them about a concept alien to most endurance in the face of what should be unbearable. With careful precision, Dr. Karks adjusted the medical device around the fracture site, preparing to realign the bone. This may hurt, he warned, though the words felt hollow. Marshall had already demonstrated an ability to withstand what should be unimaginable pain. Yeah, it will, Marshall replied. His eyes locked on the doctor's movements. Just get it over with. The air in the room grew tense, each alien assistant holding their breath, tentacles and claws frozen in anticipation. Dr. Karks activated the device, and with a soft crunch, the bones slid back into place. A collective gasp of shock rippled through the room. Even among alien warriors, pain was something to be avoided, not endured. Yet the human merely grimaced, his breathing steady, refusing to show more discomfort than was absolutely necessary. There, Marshall said through gritted teeth, his voice tight but controlled. Not so bad. Slap a splint on it, and I'll be back on my feet in no time. Dr. Karks could hardly believe his own senses. You should be resting, he insisted, his voice laced with disbelief. This injury demands extensive recovery and care, but Marshall just shrugged, casting a glance down at the bandages one of the assistants was wrapping around his leg. Yeah, but we don't always get what we want, he replied, his tone casual. You patch it up and you keep going. That's how it works, not just for us, but for most life out there, right? A heavy silence followed as the alien doctors exchanged looks, absorbing the gravity of his words. For them, injuries like this were catastrophic, demanding every form of medical attention possible. But to this human, it seemed survivable. Humans didn't merely endure, they adapted, accepting pain as a necessary part of life. There was something almost unsettling in the realization. Continuing his work, Dr. Karks sealed the wound with a specialized gel, far removed from the methods he had been taught. Yet, it seemed to suit this human. He found himself unable to fathom how a species could so readily accept pain, as if it were a natural part of their existence. You act like this is just a routine part of life, Dr. Karks finally said, unable to contain his curiosity. Marshall grinned, leaning back on the examination table with an almost mischievous look. It kind of is, he replied. Look, Doc, we humans, we get hurt. Sometimes in ways we can fix, sometimes not. But the trick is to deal with what you're given. Crying about it won't change what happened, you just keep moving forward. The room grew even quieter as the alien medical staff absorbed this perspective. For them, pain was a signal to cease activity, to withdraw and seek care. But to humans, it seemed to be a simple reality to be endured, even pushed through. The resilience wasn't just physical, it was a way of thinking, a defiance of the limits nature imposed on them. And for the first time, Dr. Karks felt a curious mix of respect and fear for this species called humanity. Marshall stretched on the table, letting his gaze wander around the sterile room as the alien doctors whispered among themselves in languages he couldn't understand. It didn't bother him, he was used to this reaction by now. Most non-human species had a tough time grasping human resilience. So what now, he asked, snapping Dr. Karks and his team out of their hushed discussion. Are you guys going to keep poking at me, or can I get some crutches and head back to my unit? Dr. Karks's mandibles twitched, an instinctive, nervous reflex. We need to monitor you for potential complications, he replied carefully. Your wound, though stable, could still become infected or lead to other issues. It's vital to keep you under observation. Marshall shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck with a casual expression. Yeah, that's fair, he conceded. But I'm telling you, Doc, I've been through worse. Broke this same leg once in a training exercise back on Earth. Took a while, but it healed up fine. He glanced down at the fresh bandages, smirking. Your patch job is probably better than what I got back then. Dr. Karks observed the human for several moments, his respect mingling with curiosity. This encounter would remain with him, he knew, not merely as a medical anomaly but as a lesson in resilience, a testament to a species that had somehow evolved to endure pain without fear. As he and the other doctors watched the human prepare to rest, their expressions were marked not just by awe, but by a strange admiration. In their hearts, they knew this was more than an injury, and more than a simple encounter. This was a glimpse into the fierce, unyielding spirit that made humans a mystery in the vast tapestry of the cosmos.